The courtroom was steeped in silence, the kind that clings to the walls like heavy curtains. Every cough, every shuffle of paper, every creak of a wooden chair carried across the room with startling clarity. The trial had been underway for weeks, but on this particular day, something felt different. People who had been in the gallery since the beginning whispered among themselves, exchanging subtle glances, as if aware that this session would not proceed like all the others. The defendant sat stiffly at the front, hands folded, eyes darting from his attorney to the jury. He had spent most of the trial wearing a mask of indifference, but now his composure seemed to crack. His attorney leaned close, whispering hurried words meant to soothe, yet the man barely nodded. Across the aisle, the prosecutor's table held an entirely different energy, calm, organized, and ready. Their confidence seemed rooted not just in legal arguments, but in a single unusual piece of evidence that had dominated the case, the actions of a police dog. The dog, a German shepherd named Rex, was not physically present in the courtroom that day, but his presence hung in the air nonetheless. Rex had become almost a character in the trial, his name spoken more often than any human witness. Officers testified to his training, describing his disciplined responses, his ability to track scents, and his crucial role in locating a hidden item linked to the crime. The prosecution built its case around Rex's reliability, portraying him as a trusted professional in his own right. The defense, however, fought bitterly against this narrative. They argued that a dog, no matter how well trained, was still an animal prone to error, bias, or handler influence. They suggested that Rex's alert could have been misinterpreted, or worse, subtly guided by his officer. Week after week, experts on canine behavior and law enforcement practices had taken the stand, filling the courtroom with technical jargon and conflicting testimonies. The jury listened, taking notes, their expressions unreadable. But even with all the testimony, something remained unresolved. The truth of what had happened during the police raid was still hazy. The evidence rested not only on Rex's nose, but on how humans interpreted his actions. The defense knew if they could undermine the credibility of the dog, they could unravel the prosecution's case. The prosecution, on the other hand, believed that Rex's instinct and record spoke louder than doubts. On this day, however, an unexpected name appeared on the witness list, surprising nearly everyone: a toddler. The very idea sounded absurd to most in the room. A child barely able to form sentences. What contribution could he possibly make to a trial of such seriousness? The gallery buzzed when whispers of his presence spread. Some shook their heads, assuming it was a mistake. Others leaned forward eagerly, sensing drama. The judge himself raised an eyebrow when the possibility was first mentioned, skeptical but willing to entertain it. As the court session opened, the atmosphere grew heavier. Jurors straightened in their seats, sensing something unusual was about to unfold. The bailiff's voice rang out as the session was called to order, echoing through the chamber with formal authority. The judge entered, his black robe sweeping as he took his seat. His expression betrayed a man determined to maintain order, no matter how strange the proceedings might become. Lawyers exchanged quick glances, each silently preparing strategies for whatever came next. The defense attorney, a man with sharp features and a reputation for dismantling weak witnesses, looked smug. He clearly believed that if a toddler were allowed to speak, the moment would collapse into irrelevance, perhaps even backfire on the prosecution. He leaned back in his chair, smirking faintly, waiting for the embarrassment he expected to watch unfold. The prosecutor, in contrast, appeared focused, almost serene. She adjusted her notes, but her calm demeanor suggested she knew something others did not. She had insisted on including the toddler, despite the raised eyebrows and whispered objections from colleagues. She believed in the value of innocence, in the purity of observation that came without calculation. She was betting her case on a child who barely knew the weight of words. The toddler sat quietly in the gallery with his mother, small legs swinging above the floor, unaware of the tension that his presence had created. His round cheeks and wide eyes made him look impossibly out of place amid the dark suits and stern faces. He clutched a worn toy truck, rolling its tiny wheels back and forth against his mother's arm. For him, the courtroom was just another unfamiliar room filled with strangers. Yet behind that innocence lay the memory of something he had seen, something everyone else overlooked. As the formalities concluded, the judge addressed the courtroom with measured authority. "We will now proceed with witness testimony. I understand the prosecution has made an unusual request." His gaze swept the room, pausing momentarily on the child. "While this is highly irregular, I am willing to allow a brief statement, provided decorum is maintained. Let it be clear, this is not a performance. If I sense any misuse of this courtroom's dignity, the matter will end immediately." The gallery murmured, restrained only by the bailiff's stern glance. The defense attorney smirked openly now, as if he had just been handed a gift. "Your Honor," he said, rising slightly, "with all due respect, we are speaking of a toddler. I trust the court sees how unreasonable this is." The judge raised a hand. "Counselor, I have made my ruling. You will have your opportunity to respond afterward. Sit down." The defense sat, lips pressed tight. The prosecutor rose, smoothing her skirt, and addressed the room with steady confidence. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this child is not here as a conventional witness. He will not give testimony in the way adults do. But he was present at a critical moment in this case. His perspective, however limited, may shed unexpected light. I ask only that we allow him the chance to speak for himself." Eyes turned again to the boy, who seemed more fascinated by the wooden carvings on the bench than the tension surrounding him. The judge gave a nod. "Proceed." The prosecutor approached the child slowly, lowering herself to his eye level. Her voice softened, stripped of the sharp edges she used when addressing hostile witnesses. "Hi there," she said gently. "Do you remember me?" The boy blinked, then shook his head, returning to his toy truck. The gallery chuckled softly, the tension easing for a moment. The prosecutor smiled patiently. "That's all right. I just want to ask you something very simple. Can you tell us about the dog you saw?" The words hung in the air. The boy stopped rolling the truck, eyes drifting upward. His lips pressed together, as if considering. The courtroom stilled, every adult leaning forward, unsure what might come. Even the judge leaned slightly, curiosity piercing through his stern facade. The boy's mother whispered encouragement, stroking his hair. For a moment, he said nothing, the silence stretching so long that the defense attorney nearly stood to object. Then, just as the judge's gavel hand twitched, the child opened his mouth. The first sound was garbled, little more than a mumble. But then he tried again, his tiny voice carrying across the courtroom with startling clarity. And in that instant, every person in the room realized the day was about to take an unexpected turn. The name Rex had been uttered so often in that courtroom, it was as though the German shepherd were sitting on the witness stand himself. Even without his physical presence, Rex loomed large in every testimony, every argument, every whispered conversation that fluttered through the gallery benches. People had heard of police dogs, of course, but few had ever seen a trial hinge so completely on the instincts of one animal. Rex had a reputation. Within his department, he was spoken of with pride and reverence. His handler, Officer Daniels, described him not just as a dog, but as a partner who saved lives. With a glossy coat, intelligent eyes, and a track record of successful operations, Rex had become a symbol of the unit's efficiency. But now, his reliability was being placed under a microscope sharper than any Daniels had faced before. On the stand, Daniels spoke passionately about Rex's years of training. He detailed long hours of drills, scenarios where Rex was taught to follow scents, ignore distractions, and signal with absolute precision when he located contraband or hidden items. His testimony painted Rex as disciplined and unfailing. "He doesn't guess," Daniels declared firmly. "Rex signals only when he's sure. And when he's sure, we listen." The prosecution leaned heavily into this narrative, presenting Rex as more than an animal. To them, he was a professional, highly trained, specialized, and capable of tasks no human could perform. They argued that his instincts during the raid were critical, that without Rex, the evidence would have gone unnoticed. To bolster their point, they produced case histories where Rex had uncovered drugs, weapons, even missing persons. Jurors listened, eyes wide, some nodding subtly as if impressed. But the defense was relentless. When their turn came, they tore into Daniels' testimony with surgical precision. Their attorney, Mr. Keller, was known for his sharp tongue and ability to sow doubt with a single raised eyebrow. "Officer Daniels," Keller began smoothly, "would you agree Rex is still, at the end of the day, a dog?" Daniels stiffened. "He's a trained K-9 unit. A dog," Keller repeated, stressing the word. "An animal. Prone to instincts, distractions, even mistakes. Isn't that true?" The objection came swiftly from the prosecution, but the judge allowed the line of questioning. Keller pressed harder, weaving in anecdotes of other cases where K-9 alerts had been proven faulty. He cited studies, reports questioning whether handlers unconsciously influenced their dogs, nudging them toward a particular outcome without even realizing it. "The problem, ladies and gentlemen," Keller said during one particularly impassioned argument to the jury, "is not whether this dog is good at what he does. The problem is whether you, as arbiters of justice, can entrust a man's freedom to the nose of an animal who cannot testify, cannot explain, cannot even be cross-examined. This is not about dogs. This is about the foundation of truth." The jury shifted uneasily. The gallery murmured, sensing the sting of Keller's words. The idea unsettled even those inclined to trust law enforcement. Could justice really rest on the signals of a creature who wagged his tail when offered a treat? Prosecutor Hamilton countered with a methodical calm that contrasted Keller's theatrics. She reminded the jury of Rex's consistency, a corroboration of his findings with human evidence. She replayed videos of training exercises, showcasing Rex's unerring ability to distinguish scents in crowded environments. "This isn't guesswork," she insisted. "This is science, sharpened by discipline. Rex is not testifying. Rex is performing a task he has done hundreds of times, with a success rate that far exceeds chance." Still, the shadow of doubt lingered. Each day, reporters filled columns with the courtroom drama. Headlines painted Rex as either a hero or a liability, depending on the outlet. Readers debated in coffee shops, offices, and kitchens. Could a dog truly determine guilt or innocence? The case was no longer just about the defendant. It had become a referendum on trust itself. And then, amid all the voices, came the quiet revelation. A child had been present when Rex acted. The detail emerged almost accidentally, tucked into the testimony of a neighbor who had described the raid. She mentioned, almost offhand, that a toddler had been in the room when Rex signaled at the hidden compartment. The boy had been sitting nearby, wide-eyed and clutching a toy, watching the officers and the dog with the unfiltered gaze only children possess. At first, the courtroom barely reacted, but Hamilton caught it instantly. A child's untainted memory, raw, innocent, free from bias, could tilt the scales in a way adult witnesses could not. Children didn't care about legal strategy. They noticed things others missed, even if they couldn't always articulate them. The defense laughed at the idea when it was first floated. Keller smirked, shaking his head. "Your Honor, we cannot seriously be considering the testimony of a toddler. What could he possibly offer? But Hamilton was insistent. She didn't claim the child could unravel the complexities of scent detection or training protocols. Instead, she argued the boy could provide something far simpler, truth in its most basic form. He was there, she said firmly. He saw the dog act. Whatever his words may be, they will be his own. That is worth hearing. The judge wrestled with the request. Allowing a toddler on the stand was unprecedented in his courtroom. The risk of spectacle loomed large, and he despised theatrics. But the law also valued witness presence, and the child, however young, had indeed been present. After much deliberation, he relented cautiously, with strict boundaries. The boy would not be grilled like an adult, but he would be given the chance to speak. News of the judge's decision spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the courthouse steps were crowded with onlookers, journalists and curious citizens eager to see the toddler witness. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The jury, too, seemed both anxious and intrigued, wondering what role this child could possibly play in such a serious case. Rex's reputation hung in the balance. If the toddler said nothing, the defense would ridicule the prosecution for desperation. But if the child spoke even a word or two, his innocence could cut through the fog of doubt like a knife. The stakes had shifted. The trial was no longer just man against state, or defense against prosecution. It was now a question of whether the smallest voice in the room could tip the scales of justice. And as the boy's name was called, and his mother rose to carry him forward, the entire courtroom leaned in, breaths held, waiting for the next chapter of a case unlike any they had ever seen. The courtroom, normally a place where adults in suits exchanged arguments and evidence, now found itself preparing for the presence of someone who had never even set foot in a school. The toddler at the heart of the commotion was named Jamie, a 2-year-old with curly hair and an expression that shifted quickly between curiosity and shyness. He was far too young to understand the magnitude of the moment, but everyone else in the room seemed painfully aware. Jamie's life before the trial was simple, defined by routines of naps, playtime, and small adventures within his family's modest apartment. He lived with his mother, Anna, who worked part-time as a cashier, and his grandmother, who often babysat. The family had no ties to law enforcement or criminal networks. They were ordinary people, swept into extraordinary circumstances when the raid occurred. That raid had been sudden, loud, and terrifying. Officers in dark uniforms had stormed the building, shouting commands that echoed through the walls. Neighbors peered through cracked doors while children cried in confusion. Amid the chaos, Jamie had been in the living room, playing on the carpet with his toy truck. His mother had tried to shield him, pulling him close, but Jamie's eyes had already locked on the most unusual figure in the room, Rex, the German Shepherd. Unlike the shouting officers, Rex moved with silent certainty. The dog's nose pressed against the walls, the furniture, the edges of the carpet. His tail was stiff, his body tense, signaling he was on the trail of something important. Jamie, too young to fear uniforms or understand warrants, watched with wide-eyed fascination. To him, Rex was not an officer, but a creature unlike any he had seen before. He noticed every movement, every pause, every decisive moment when Rex seemed to fix on a hidden corner. Adults later recalled the discovery with official language. Rex alerted to a compartment behind a heater, where critical evidence was concealed. But Jamie had no such words. What he remembered was simple. He saw the dog pause, sniff, and then react. In his tiny mind, it was just like when he played hide-and-seek with his toys. He had no notion of legality or guilt. He only saw a dog finding something. In the weeks following the raid, Jamie babbled occasionally about Doggy while rolling his truck across the floor. His mother, still shaken, didn't think much of it. To her, It was natural children fixated on unusual sights, and the large dog had clearly fascinated him. But as the trial developed, whispers about Jamie's presence during the incident began to surface. The prosecutor, sharp-eared and always searching for overlooked details, took note. If Jamie remembered anything, no matter how small, it could matter more than any adult testimony. Anna was hesitant when first approached. The idea of her son speaking in court seemed absurd. He was barely forming sentences, his vocabulary limited to short words and phrases. She feared the courtroom would overwhelm him, that strangers might laugh or twist his words. But the prosecutor assured her the child would not be pressured. "We don't need long answers," she explained. "Sometimes truth can come in the smallest form." The defense, upon learning of this possibility, scoffed openly. Keller made no attempt to hide his disdain. "We're calling toddlers now," he said during a recess, loud enough for reporters to overhear. "What's next, puppies testifying for the prosecution?" His sarcasm drew laughter from some corners, but it also revealed his nerves. He knew jurors often valued sincerity, and nothing was more sincere than a child too young to fabricate. In preparation, Anna sat with Jamie at home, gently reminding him of the day of the raid. She didn't coach him with elaborate phrases. She knew he wouldn't repeat them. Instead, she asked simple questions. "Do you remember the doggy? What did he do?" Sometimes Jamie shrugged, distracted by his toys. Other times, he would murmur two words, vague but telling. "Doggy find." When Anna told the prosecutor about this, Hamilton's heart leapt. Two words, spoken with such unfiltered honesty, might pierce through all the noise of experts and lawyers. It wasn't about whether Jamie understood the stakes. It was that he had seen what happened with a clarity adults had complicated. Back in the courtroom, however, skepticism remained thick. The jurors shifted uneasily in their seats whenever the child was mentioned. Some looked doubtful, others intrigued. They wondered if such testimony was even permissible, or if it would devolve into an embarrassing spectacle. But beneath their doubts was curiosity, a hunger for something real amid the endless swirl of legal arguments. On the morning Jamie was scheduled to appear, the courthouse felt different. Security guards exchanged uncertain glances as Anna carried her son past metal detectors, his toy truck clutched tightly in one small hand. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions that Anna ignored. She kept her head down, shielding Jamie from the chaos. Inside, whispers rippled as soon as people saw her enter the gallery. Keller, sensing opportunity, prepared his rebuttals. He planned to paint the moment as desperation, a stunt designed to sway emotions rather than present evidence. Children are impressionable, he rehearsed in his mind. They mimic words without meaning. You wouldn't decide a case based on a baby's babble, would you? He was confident, yet the slight crease in his forehead betrayed unease. Hamilton, by contrast, felt calm but resolute. She had placed her faith in the smallest witness she had ever called. She wasn't gambling on eloquence, but on purity. In her heart, she believed jurors yearned for something beyond technicalities, something human. When the session began, the judge addressed the unusual circumstances carefully. "This is not conventional," he reminded the jury, "and you are to weigh what you hear with discernment. Remember, you are not listening for complexity, but for honesty." His eyes scanned the gallery, landing briefly on the child. The stern lines of his face softened ever so slightly. Jamie was led forward, perched on his mother's lap at the edge of the witness stand. The room seemed to exhale collectively, tension spilling into the quiet. The little boy looked around, wide-eyed, fascinated by the high ceilings, the wooden benches, the people staring. His toy truck rattled softly in his hands. For many in the room, the sight was disarming. Hardened officers, weary lawyers, Even skeptical jurors found themselves leaning forward involuntarily, struck by the sheer innocence of the moment. This wasn't an expert hired to sway opinions, nor a seasoned officer defending his decisions. This was a child who had no concept of guilt or innocence, law or strategy. And in that innocence lay the possibility of truth, delivered in its simplest, most undeniable form. As Jamie shifted in his mother's arms, the prosecutor approached slowly, crouching to meet his eyes. The entire courtroom fell into a silence deeper than any that had preceded it, a silence that seemed to hold its breath. The smallest witness in the case was ready to be heard. The courtroom had seen unusual witnesses before, experts from distant universities, officers with long service records, even neighbors who recalled snippets of conversations. But nothing compared to what was about to unfold. For the first time in his career, Judge Morrison allowed a toddler to be brought forward in a trial that hinged on evidence as serious as hidden contraband. The decision had sparked debate in legal circles, yet here it was happening in real time, under the watchful eyes of reporters, ready to transmit every detail beyond the courthouse walls. Anna rose from her seat in the gallery, Jamie perched on her hip. The boy's head rested on her shoulder, curls bouncing slightly as she walked toward the front. Whispers rippled through the crowd, hushed voices passing along thoughts like a current. The bailiff guided her gently, making sure the mother and child had a seat at the edge of the witness stand. Jamie clutched his toy truck, thumb rubbing the faded paint as though it anchored him in the sea of strange faces. The defense attorney Keller leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips. He tapped his pen against a legal pad, clearly convinced the spectacle would collapse under its own weight. He whispered something to his co-counsel, who chuckled softly. Their confidence bordered on arrogance. To them, a 2-year-old was nothing more than a diversion, an emotional appeal that could never survive cross-examination. Prosecutor Hamilton, however, moved with quiet determination. She rose from her table, gathering her notes, though she hardly needed them. She had prepared carefully for this moment, but she also knew preparation could only go so far. Children were unpredictable, and Jamie would not recite a rehearsed speech. She had to trust the simplicity of his memory. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. The court recognizes that this testimony is highly irregular, he said, voice booming across the chamber. But it is allowed on the understanding that the child will not be pressured. The jury is instructed to weigh what they hear with care. Proceed, Ms. Hamilton. Hamilton approached slowly, not with the sharp steps she used when confronting hostile witnesses, but with the careful grace of someone entering a nursery. She crouched slightly, so she was closer to Jamie's level. Hi, Jamie, she said softly, her voice carrying warmth instead of authority. Do you see me? Jamie blinked, staring at her. His grip on the truck tightened, wheels squeaking faintly as he rolled them against his mother's arm. He didn't answer. That's all right, Hamilton said, smiling patiently. I just want to talk to you about a dog. Do you remember the doggy? The word seemed to catch Jamie's attention. His eyes widened a fraction, recognition flickering in his expression. But then he buried his face against his mother's chest, shy and uncertain. The gallery chuckled gently, some exchanging knowing smiles. It was the familiar shyness of a toddler in front of strangers, a human moment that softened even the most hardened faces. The defense pounced instantly. Your Honor, Keller said, rising smoothly, I think this demonstrates the futility of this exercise. The child cannot communicate in a meaningful way. This is a waste of the court's time. Sit down, Mr. Keller, the judge said sharply. The witness has barely been addressed. The court will allow more time. Keller sank back into his chair, his smirk fading slightly. Hamilton continued, keeping her tone light. That's okay, Jamie. You don't have to be scared. I just want to know about the doggy. What did the doggy do? Jamie peeked out again, eyes darting to the prosecutor, then to the jury, then back to his toy. He fiddled with the truck, rolling it along the edge of the witness stand. For a moment, it seemed like he might ignore her entirely. The silence grew heavy, stretching across the room. The judge shifted in his chair. Jurors exchanged glances, wondering if this was the end of the experiment. Anna stroked her son's hair gently, whispering, "It's okay. Jamie, you can tell her about the doggy." The little boy's lips parted, but only a faint sound emerged, garbled and indistinct. The gallery leaned forward, straining to hear, but it was nothing clear. Hamilton waited patiently, not pushing. The boy squirmed, restless under the weight of so many stares. At the defense table, Keller relaxed again, confidence returning. He scribbled a note on his pad, likely preparing a biting remark for when the testimony collapsed entirely. His smirk returned, smug as ever. Hamilton tried a different approach. She gestured toward Jamie's toy truck. "That's a nice truck. Does the doggy have toys too?" Jamie looked at her, silent, but the question seemed to hold him. His gaze lingered, as if connecting the familiar his truck with the strange memory of the dog. His small brow furrowed. His mouth opened again, but this time he stopped himself, sucking his thumb instead. The room seemed to deflate. Jurors shifted, exhaling quietly. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, not in reprimand, but in restless impatience. "Ms. Hamilton, if you cannot elicit a response soon, we may need to conclude this session." Hamilton nodded respectfully, but did not retreat. She leaned forward just slightly, lowering her voice so it felt like a secret. "Jamie, when you saw the doggy that day, did he do something special? Something you remember?" The boy blinked. His thumb slipped from his mouth. He glanced at his mother, then at the jury, then back at the prosecutor. The courtroom froze, caught in a collective breath. And then nothing. He dropped his gaze and resumed pushing the truck, wheels clattering softly against the wooden surface. A ripple of disappointment ran through the room. The defense attorney rose again, smugness thick in his voice. "Your Honor, I think the point has been made. This child is not capable of providing reliable testimony. I move that this entire charade be struck from the record." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "We will deliberate on that matter after recess. For now, the child will remain." Hamilton, though outwardly calm, felt her heart racing. She had known the risk, but watching it unfold was painful. Yet something in Jamie's fleeting expressions told her not to give up. He was remembering, she was certain. It was there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right spark. As the gavel signaled a break, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some said it had been a failure, a waste of time. Others whispered that the boy had seemed on the verge of speaking. Reporters scribbled furiously, headlines already forming in their minds. Meanwhile, Jamie nestled into his mother's arms, unaware of the storm he had stirred. For him, the courtroom was still just a strange place filled with big people and heavy voices. But behind his wide eyes, memories of Rex lingered. Memories that, when spoken, would shock every person in the room. The stage was set. The boy had not yet spoken the words, but tension had reached a breaking point. Everyone knew the next attempt could decide whether this gamble turned into ridicule or revelation. The courtroom settled again after recess, the chatter of voices fading into silence as the gavel struck. Judge Morrison re-entered with his usual measured pace, his robe trailing behind him like a heavy shadow. He glanced at the jurors, then at the toddler perched once more in the witness chair. It was clear the judge carried doubts, but his expression showed determination to see the process through, no matter how unconventional. Anna adjusted Jamie on her lap, whispering softly in his ear. He clutched his toy truck, as though it were a lifeline. His eyes darted nervously from the high ceiling to the jurors' faces. taking in the intimidating spectacle of adults staring at him in expectant silence. The little boy squirmed, frowning at the pressure. Prosecutor Hamilton stood again, a quiet confidence in her step. Yet beneath that composure, her thoughts raced. She knew this was it, the moment that would either cement her case or unravel it in ridicule. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself before speaking. "Jamie," she said, crouching slightly to meet his gaze again. "Remember the doggy?" Jamie nodded faintly this time, almost imperceptible, but it sent a ripple through the jury box. Some jurors leaned forward, sensing movement where before there had been only silence. Hamilton smiled gently, encouraging him. "That's very good," she continued softly. "Can you tell us what the doggy did?" Jamie's tiny lips parted. His voice was faint, uncertain, but there, "Doggy." "Run." The sound echoed more loudly in the still room than anyone expected. Gasps slipped from the gallery, not because of what he said, but because he said anything at all. The defense attorney, Keller, leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, this is meaningless. A child's random word cannot be treated as evidence." "Doggy run? What does that prove?" "Nothing." But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Sit down, Mr. Keller. The court will allow the boy to continue." Hamilton felt a surge of relief. It wasn't enough, but it was a crack in the wall. She leaned closer. "Yes, Jamie, the doggy ran." "Do you remember where?" Jamie's face scrunched as he thought. His small fingers tightened around the truck. He opened his mouth again, but the words stumbled. A soft whine of frustration slipped out instead. He buried his face in his mother's shoulder, as though retreating from the daunting task. Anna kissed his hair. "You're doing so well, sweetheart," she whispered. "It's okay." The room fell into a delicate tension. Everyone waited, the jurors with breath held, the judge with patient sternness, the attorneys poised between victory and defeat. The moment felt stretched thin, like glass ready to crack. Hamilton's tone softened even further. "Jamie, can you tell us what the doggy found?" For a moment, silence reigned. Jamie looked down at his toy, rolling the wheels back and forth, the squeak of rubber echoing faintly. Then, as if something clicked in his young mind, he looked up at the prosecutor. His face lit with the clarity only children can muster, and in a clear, small voice, he said 2 words. "Bad man," the courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, shocked exclamations cascaded through the chamber like a wave. The jurors froze, some with mouths hanging open, others scribbling furiously in their notebooks. The judge pounded his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" His voice struggled to contain the uproar, but even he could not mask the astonishment on his own face. Keller sprang to his feet again, his face red. "Objection. This is outrageous. The child has been coached, clearly coached." His words were sharp, almost desperate. "This cannot be admissible." But the damage was done. The jury had heard it, clear as day, from the mouth of the only witness, who had no reason to fabricate, no understanding of the stakes. A toddler's unvarnished memory had pierced through layers of legal argument. Hamilton kept her composure, though inside her chest thundered with triumph. She nodded softly, turning back to Jamie. "That's right, Jamie. The doggy found the bad man." Jamie clapped his hands lightly, smiling at the simplicity of his statement. To him, it was nothing extraordinary. He had spoken the truth as he remembered it, nothing more. But to the courtroom, those 2 words carried the weight of a verdict. Judge Morrison finally restored order, though whispers continued to ripple across the gallery. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. The jury will disregard the emotional reaction and focus solely on the facts presented. The testimony stands for the record. Keller slumped back into his chair, the smugness gone, replaced with a nervous twitch of his jaw. His defense strategy, carefully built on undermining the credibility of the police dog, now hung by a thread. A child's innocent words had reinforced the prosecution's entire argument. Hamilton returned to her seat, her eyes meeting those of the jurors. She saw it, the subtle nods, the flickers of realization. The tide was shifting, unmistakably, irrevocably. Meanwhile, Jamie wriggled happily in his mother's arms, unaware of the storm he had unleashed. He was ready for his nap, his toy truck still in hand. To him, it had been nothing more than answering a simple question about the doggie he remembered. But for everyone else, the case had taken a dramatic turn. 2 words, spoken with toddler clarity, had done what hours of expert testimony had struggled to achieve. They had breathed life into the truth, stripped of complexity, leaving the courtroom in awe. When the gavel finally struck to dismiss for the day, the reporters rushed for the doors, their pens scribbling headlines before ink could dry. Toddler identifies bad man in courtroom drama. 2 words that stunned a trial. Justice from the mouth of a child. The jurors filed out, their faces thoughtful, their minds heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. The case would not be decided that day, but the balance had undeniably shifted. The testimony of a toddler had carved itself into the heart of the trial, impossible to ignore. And so, as the crowd spilled into the corridors, buzzing with disbelief, the memory of those 2 small words lingered. Bad man, simple, undeniable, unforgettable. The echo of Jamie's 2 words still seemed to hang in the air long after the gavel had fallen. Even as Judge Morrison called for order again and again, the murmurs refused to fully subside. People had seen many things inside that courtroom, but never had they witnessed a toddler, barely able to string sentences together, deliver a statement so disarmingly clear and so devastating in its implications. At the prosecution table, Hamilton sat perfectly still, letting the shock play itself out. She knew better than to gloat. A win this clean, 2 words that cut through every line of defense, needed no embellishment. The jurors had leaned forward instinctively, their eyes locked on Jamie, their faces betraying the pull of raw truth. It was the sort of testimony no one could prepare for, and no one could easily dismiss. Keller, however, was already on his feet, his composure fraying at the edges. He had built his strategy on undermining the reliability of the police dog, mocking the idea that a canine could be a trustworthy source of evidence. But now, a child, whose innocence was beyond legal manipulation, had spoken of the dog finding the bad man. It cut at the very foundation of his argument. "Your Honor," Keller snapped, his voice rising above the lingering whispers, "this is a farce. The prosecution is exploiting a child who cannot possibly comprehend the gravity of these proceedings. Those words are meaningless, born of suggestion. We must strike them from the record before the jury allows sentiment to poison their judgment." Judge Morrison adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing as he studied the defense attorney. "Mr. Keller, the jury has already heard the statement. Whether or not it carries weight is for them to decide. Your objection is noted, but the testimony stands." Keller clenched his jaw, lowering himself reluctantly into his chair. His co-counsel whispered hurriedly in his ear, suggesting lines of attack, claims of coaching, challenges to admissibility, perhaps even a motion for mistrial. But the damage was done. The jury had heard the child, and no amount of legal maneuvering could erase the memory of those words. In the gallery, spectators whispered fiercely to one another. Some leaned over pews to exchange wide-eyed commentary. "Did you hear that?" Clear as day, "bad man." Others shook their heads, astonished. Reporters scribbled furiously, already crafting the next morning's headlines. The buzz of excitement felt more like a sporting event than a trial. At the witness stand, Jamie sat unaware of the tidal wave he had unleashed. He clapped his hands softly, giggling at the noise they made. To him, the courtroom's eruption was no more than grown-ups getting too loud again. Anna kissed his temple, tears shining in her eyes. She had not expected him to speak with such clarity, but in her heart she knew it was truth. Hamilton finally rose again, her movements unhurried, her voice calm. She had no intention of pushing Jamie further. She had gotten more than she dreamed possible. "Thank you, Jamie," she said gently. "You did very well. That's all we need today." The judge nodded firmly. "The child is excused." Applause broke out from the corner of the gallery before the bailiff barked a sharp warning. Still, the sentiment lingered. As Anna carried Jamie back to her seat, heads turned, eyes softening. For once, the courtroom felt touched by something larger than law, the unvarnished simplicity of a child's perspective. When the jurors returned their attention to the front, the shift was visible. Shoulders leaned forward. Notepads were filled with frantic scribbles. Some whispered quietly to themselves, trying to make sense of how two small words could carry such weight. Juror number 7, a stern-faced accountant, had been skeptical of the prosecution's reliance on the police dog. But now his expression had softened, his brow furrowed in reconsideration. Juror number 3, who had seemed detached for much of the trial, now sat upright, pen tapping rapidly. Keller noticed the shift, and it burned him. He tapped his pen against the table, mind racing. If he didn't dismantle this moment, it could be the end of his defense. He whispered urgently to his co-counsel, "We'll hammer on coaching. We'll call it a stunt. The jury's emotional, not rational. We need to reframe this before it hardens into fact." But Hamilton was already 2 steps ahead. She knew the defense would cry foul. She also knew the jury had felt something real. Emotion and truth were not enemies when aligned. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "Court will recess for the afternoon. Counsel for both sides, prepare your motions. We will resume tomorrow morning." The gavel struck, but the buzz did not die. Jurors filed out, their expressions thoughtful, their conversations hushed but intense. The gallery spilled into the hallways, reporters shoving recorders in front of anyone willing to speak. The courthouse steps soon filled with a storm of speculation, the crowd outside feeding off fragments of information. Inside, Hamilton gathered her papers calmly, but a quiet smile tugged at her lips. She glanced once more at the jury box before leaving. The seed had been planted. Keller, on the other hand, slammed his briefcase shut with more force than necessary. "This is theater," he muttered to his co-counsel. "We'll shred it tomorrow. Mark my words." But even he did not sound convinced. That evening, news stations across the country carried the story. Clips of courtroom sketches showed a curly-haired boy with wide eyes, holding a toy truck in his lap. Anchors repeated the phrase again and again, "Bad man." Commentators debated furiously. Some claimed it was the purest truth possible, a child too young to fabricate. Others argued it was manipulation, an emotional ploy designed to sway a jury. But the public was hooked. Social media lit up with outrage, admiration, and disbelief. Hashtags trended. Memes appeared within hours. "Bad man" became more than words. It became a cultural moment, proof that sometimes justice arrived from the most unlikely source. Back at home, Anna tucked Jamie into bed. He curled beneath his blanket, toy truck beside him, blissfully unaware of his sudden fame. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "You were so brave today." Jamie mumbled drowsily, "Doggy." "Bad man," before drifting into sleep. To him, it was just a memory, one among many. To the world beyond his bedroom, it was a thunderclap of truth. In the stillness of the courthouse that night, empty benches and silent walls seemed to echo the words that had changed everything. The case had been complicated, filled with legal nuance and bitter argument. But now, 2 words had risen above all else, seared into the minds of jurors and public alike. "Bad man." the phrase would not be forgotten. And for the defense, tomorrow would be a desperate scramble to undo what could never truly be erased. The next morning, the courthouse brimmed with tension. Lines of people stretched down the steps, all hoping to squeeze into the gallery to witness what had become the trial's most sensational chapter. Overnight, the 2 words spoken by Jamie had flooded newspapers, television broadcasts, and radio stations. By dawn, "Bad Man" was already a national headline. Inside the courtroom, reporters jostled for space, their pens and recorders ready. The jurors filed in, their faces unreadable, though a few carried the lingering air of sleepless nights. Judge Morrison entered and scanned the room with his usual gravitas. He knew control would be harder today. Every person present was hungry for drama, ready for the next turn. "Court is in session," he announced firmly. "We will resume proceedings. Mr. Keller, I understand you wish to address the court regarding yesterday's testimony." Keller rose, buttoning his jacket, as if to armor himself. His voice rang sharp, confident, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed the pressure he felt. "Yes, Your Honor. Yesterday's display was not testimony. It was theater, an emotional stunt designed to manipulate this jury. A 2-year-old child cannot comprehend the nature of truth or lies, cannot understand the weight of evidence, and cannot be cross-examined. What we saw was the prosecution weaponizing innocence." He let his words hang, watching the jurors carefully. Some nodded faintly, considering his point. Others remained still, remembering the boy's clear voice, the simplicity of his statement. Keller pressed on. "I move to strike the child's words from the record. Failing that, I demand the court acknowledge their utter lack of reliability." Hamilton rose smoothly before the judge could reply. "Your Honor, the defense can call this theater, but what we saw yesterday was the unfiltered memory of a child too young to lie with strategy. He was not rehearsed. He was not prompted. He spoke truthfully in his own words about what he saw. The jury has the right to weigh the testimony as they would any other." The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel lightly in thought. "Mr. Keller, you are free to question the credibility of the testimony in your arguments, but the words remain on the record. The jury will decide their weight." Objection overruled. Keller's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. The ruling meant the 2 words would stay alive in the case, no matter how desperately he wished to bury them. He pivoted to a new strategy. Rising again, he addressed the jury directly, his voice smooth now, measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, think carefully. You are not here to decide cases based on sympathy. You are here to decide based on facts and evidence." A toddler repeating the phrase "bad man" could mean anything. He could have overheard it from his mother, from television, even from the officers themselves. Are we really to believe justice should hang on the babble of a child barely out of diapers? The jurors shifted. Some frowned, absorbing his words. Juror number 7, the accountant, scribbled a note in the margin of his legal pad. Juror number 3, who had seemed swayed the day before, crossed her arms, considering. The balance teetered, fragile. Hamilton rose again, refusing to let the defense hold the floor. "Mr. Keller asks you to dismiss Jamie's words as meaningless. But let's recall, no one told him what to say. He was asked a simple question: what did the dog do? And in his own words, he told you, the dog found the bad man. He remembered what he saw, and the truth of his memory matches the evidence already presented by trained officers. This is not theater. This is confirmation." Her words carried a quiet force. She didn't need theatrics. She had the power of alignment, the child's words dovetailing with the dog's actions, with the sequence of events already laid before the court. The jurors' eyes flickered with recognition. Keller tried to regain ground. He called Officer Ruiz back to the stand, grilling him on the dog's training, pushing hard on the possibility of mistakes. "Isn't it true," Keller barked, "that dogs can be influenced by their handlers? Isn't it true that errors happen? That false alerts occur?" Ruiz, steady and unflinching, answered with calm professionalism. "Errors are possible, yes. But in this case, the dog's alert was corroborated by physical evidence recovered at the scene. Evidence that led directly to the defendant." The jury scribbled again. Keller's line of attack faltered. Every point he raised seemed to crumble under the weight of corroboration. Hamilton, sensing opportunity, returned for redirect. "Officer Ruiz, when Jamie was present that day, did anyone instruct him on what to think about the dog?" "No, ma'am," Ruiz replied. "The boy was simply there. He saw the dog track to the defendant. That's all. And the words he spoke yesterday," Hamilton said, "do they align with what you witnessed?" "Yes, they do," Ruiz confirmed firmly. The connection was undeniable. Keller slumped slightly, adjusting his tie with a jerky motion, his confidence waning. Throughout the exchange, the jury absorbed every detail. Their pens moved. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to cautious belief. The ripple that had begun with Jamie's words was now spreading wider, reinforced by each testimony that aligned with his memory. In the gallery, tension crackled. Spectators leaned forward, whispering to one another. Reporters wrote furiously, sensing the trial had turned into something historic, a blend of innocence and law colliding in a way that no one could have scripted. As the day drew to a close, Judge Morrison addressed the court. "Both sides have presented strong arguments, but I remind the jury, your duty is to weigh the credibility of all evidence, including testimony. You must set aside emotion and consider facts." He paused, glancing briefly at the jurors, then at the boy who had spoken those two unforgettable words. "This case, perhaps more than most, demands careful judgment." The gavel fell and court recessed. Outside, the courthouse steps once again filled with a storm of voices. Reporters surrounded Hamilton, microphones thrust toward her. She answered calmly, refusing to overplay the moment. "Justice is about truth. And yesterday, truth was spoken in the simplest of words." Keller, cornered by cameras, scowled. "This is not justice. This is exploitation. Mark my words, this is far from over." But even he knew the tide was slipping from his grasp. That night, jurors returned to their homes, carrying not only notebooks of evidence, but also the echo of a toddler's voice. Some tried to shake it off, reminding themselves to rely only on logic. Others couldn't help but feel the weight of innocence cutting through the noise. The trial was not yet finished, but the momentum was undeniable. In the quiet of their thoughts, more than one juror whispered to themselves the same phrase that had now gripped a nation: "Bad man." And with those words, the scales of justice tipped ever further toward their final balance. The courtroom was unusually silent as the final day of deliberation approached. Jurors filed in, notebooks filled, pens worn down from hours of scrutiny. Outside, the world waited. News outlets had followed the trial intensely, updating the public hour by hour. "Toddler testifies, court stunned," read one headline. "Two words could decide a case," read another. The phrase "bad man" had become a mantra, replayed across television screens and social media, a cultural punctuation to a case that had defied convention. Inside, the judge gave his instructions carefully, aware of the unusual nature of the proceedings. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "you are tasked with weighing the totality of evidence in this case. That includes witness testimony, physical evidence, and any observations made by those present, including those who may be unconventional. You are to deliberate fairly and without prejudice." The jurors nodded, rising as they were led to the deliberation room. The courtroom emptied slowly. each movement heavy with anticipation. For the defendant, seated at the front, every heartbeat felt amplified. The months of legal strategy, the uncertainty, and the constant tension had brought him to this moment. His eyes flicked toward the gallery, toward Anna and Jamie, who sat quietly, unaware of the gravity his fate now held. Inside the deliberation room, the jury began to dissect every piece of evidence once again. Some focused on the tangible, fingerprints, the recovered contraband, the officer testimonies. Others discussed the more unusual elements, particularly Jamie's brief but unforgettable contribution. "I can't ignore that boy," juror number 3 admitted. "He's too young to lie." Whatever he saw clearly. Juror number 7, the accountant, nodded in agreement. "It aligns with the dog's tracking and the evidence recovered. It's not just a cute moment. It actually makes sense in the context of what we know." Other jurors were initially skeptical. "A toddler? Really?" One whispered. "I mean, he said, 'Bad man,' that's it. Can that carry real weight?" "Yes, it can," another countered. "It's consistent. We have the dog's alert, the officer's testimony, and the scene itself. The boy's words tie it all together in a way we can't dismiss." Hours passed as the jury debated, arguments weaving back and forth. Outside, journalists updated feeds, people in cafes argued about the trial, and social media erupted with speculation. The tension built like a storm approaching landfall. Finally, a foreperson stood, clearing his throat. "We've reached a verdict," he announced, his voice steady but heavy. The doors to the courtroom opened, and the jurors filed in, faces calm, but eyes carrying the weight of their decision. Judge Morrison looked over the courtroom. "Please rise." The room rose, anticipation crackling in the air like static. The foreperson handed a folded piece of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He read the words aloud carefully, ensuring every syllable carried its weight. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged." A hush fell over the room, broken only by the faint shuffle of papers. The defendant's shoulders slumped. His legal team whispered words of consolation, though the reality was undeniable. Hamilton exhaled quietly, relief and triumph mixed in equal measure. She did not cheer. She simply allowed herself a small smile, acknowledging the culmination of months of strategy, preparation, and persistence. Keller, still seated, stared blankly. The courtroom seemed to tilt against him. Every argument he had mounted, every challenge to evidence, every attempt to discredit the dog or the child's testimony had been rendered insufficient. The two words, innocent, unpolished, undeniable, had been decisive. Anna breathed deeply, holding Jamie close. He looked around, unconcerned with the verdict, still fascinated by the courtroom's high ceilings and strange wooden benches. To him, it was all just another adventure, though in reality, his presence had shifted the course of justice. Outside, the crowd erupted. Reporters scrambled, their cameras flashing as news spread rapidly. "Toddler's words help seal conviction," one headline read. "2-year-old witness stuns court," another blared. Social media exploded with debates, praise, and astonishment. People marveled at the idea that such a small voice could carry such immense weight. In the following weeks, the story dominated the public consciousness. Legal analysts dissected the trial, discussing the unprecedented use of a toddler's observations as corroborating evidence. Law schools used the case as an example of unconventional testimony. The public remained captivated, discussing, debating, and often marveling at the power of truth delivered without artifice. For the officers involved, Rex became a local hero once again. The German Shepherd's reputation was elevated not only as a skilled canine unit, but also as a symbol of precision and reliability. His bond with Officer Daniels, tested and proven, was celebrated in local news and police newsletters. Jamie, however, remained blissfully unaware. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. He played with his trucks, took his naps, and explored his world with the curiosity only a child could possess. To him, the court had been a strange place with many big people, loud noises, and a dog that found something important. He had said a few words, clapped his hands, and returned to his life, unknowingly leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed him. Anna often reflected on the experience, grateful for how it had unfolded. She knew that without her calm presence and gentle encouragement, Jamie might never have spoken. She marveled at how the innocence of a child could intersect with the formal machinery of law to produce clarity where adults had struggled. In the end, the trial was remembered not for its technical arguments or the minutiae of police procedure, but for a small boy who spoke 2 words with unwavering honesty. Those words, "bad man," became legendary in legal circles and popular culture alike, a reminder that truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources, unshaped by ambition, prejudice, or artifice. Even years later, when the story was recounted, people paused, smiling or shaking their heads at the sheer improbability. The power of simplicity, the courage of a child, and the precision of a loyal dog had combined to deliver justice. And in that union, the world was reminded that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones delivered in the smallest voices. Jamie never remembered the gravity of his words, but everyone else did. And for them, those 2 words echoed long after the courtroom emptied, a testament to the enduring impact of honesty, innocence, and the unexpected ways justice can reveal itself. The case closed, the verdict delivered, the courthouse emptied, but the story remained. And in that story, the boy and the dog were immortalized together, a partnership of memory and instinct, shaping the course of justice in a way no one could have predicted.